They accused her of lying, until a SEAL team walked in and turned the entire room upside down. Sarah Martinez stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway of the Department of Veterans Affairs building, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a manila folder containing what she believed was proof of her late husband's military service. The 42-year-old widow had been fighting this battle for 3 years now, ever since Miguel had passed away from complications related to what she knew were injuries sustained during his time with the Navy SEALs. The problem was simple, yet devastating. According to the VA's records, Miguel Martinez had never served in any special operations capacity. In fact, their files showed him as a basic seaman who had served only 18 months before receiving a general discharge. No combat experience. No special training, no classified missions. Just another sailor who hadn't made it through his full enlistment. Sarah knew better. She had lived with Miguel for 15 years, had seen the scars that crisscrossed his back and arms, had held him during countless nights when nightmares from Afghanistan and Iraq would wake him in cold sweats. She had watched him struggle with PTSD, had seen him flinch at loud noises, had witnessed the way he would automatically scan every room he entered, always positioning himself near exits. But try explaining that to bureaucrats who lived and died by paperwork. "Mrs. Martinez, please have a seat," called Janet Williams, the claims adjudicator who had been handling Sarah's case. Janet was a thin woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that seemed to magnify her perpetually skeptical expression. She had the demeanor of someone who had heard every sob story and excuse in the book. Sarah followed Janet into a small conference room where 2 other VA officials were already seated. Thomas Brady, the regional director, was a heavy-set man with a red face who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Beside him sat Dr. Rachel Kim, a psychiatrist who specialized in military trauma cases, but who had never served herself. "Mrs. Martinez," Janet began, opening a thick file, "we've reviewed your husband's service records multiple times. We've been more than patient with your repeated appeals, but the facts remain unchanged. Your husband served from 2001 to 2002 as an undesignated seaman. He received a general discharge due to failure to adapt to military life. There is no record of special operations training, no record of combat deployment, and certainly no record of the injuries you claim he sustained in service." Sarah's jaw tightened. "My husband told me about his missions. He had photos, medals, friends who served with him. He was part of SEAL Team 7. He was deployed to Afghanistan in 2003 and Iraq in 2005 and 2007. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Kim interrupted gently, "sometimes family members want to believe their loved ones were heroes. It's natural to want to honor their memory. But we have to deal with facts, not stories." "These aren't stories," Sarah's voice rose slightly. "I'm not some delusional widow trying to get benefits I don't deserve. My husband served his country with honor, and he died because of injuries he got fighting for that country. I have proof." She opened her manila folder and began spreading photographs across the table. Pictures of Miguel in desert camouflage, standing with other soldiers in front of military vehicles. Photos of him receiving what appeared to be commendations. A group shot of men in tactical gear with faces partially obscured. Thomas Brady barely glanced at the photos. "These could be from anywhere, Mrs. Martinez. Costume parties, military surplus store purchases, photo editing software. We see this more often than you'd think." Sarah felt her face burning. "You think I faked these?" "We're not saying you personally falsified anything," Janet said carefully. "But people who want to embellish their military service sometimes create elaborate stories. Your husband may have told you things that weren't true. He wasn't a liar. PTSD can sometimes cause people to believe experiences that didn't actually happen," Dr. Kim added. "False memories can feel very real to the person experiencing them." Sarah stared at the 3 officials, feeling like she was drowning. This was exactly what Miguel had warned her about before he died. "They'll try to erase what we did. he had told her during one of his lucid moments near the end. The missions were classified. Some of us don't officially exist. Promise me you'll fight for the truth if something happens to me. I want to speak to someone else, Sarah said firmly. I want to file another appeal. Mrs. Martinez, Brady sighed. You've already filed 6 appeals. Each one has been thoroughly investigated. Your husband's DD-214 discharge document clearly shows his service record. The Navy Personnel Command has confirmed there are no other records. At some point, you have to accept reality. The reality is that my husband served in classified operations that aren't in his regular service record, Sarah insisted. That's why I've been trying to contact people who served with him. That's why I've been asking for his full military file, not just the sanitized version you keep showing me. Ma'am, Janet said with barely concealed impatience. Classified operations aren't invisible. There are procedures, documentation, security clearances. If your husband had been involved in special operations, there would be some record of it, even if the details were classified. Sarah felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had promised Miguel she would never give up, never let them erase his service and sacrifice. But sitting in this sterile room with these people who looked at her like she was either delusional or dishonest, she wondered how much more fight she had left in her. What about his injuries? She asked. The medical records from when he came home? We've reviewed those as well, Dr. Kim said. Your husband was treated for various ailments over the years, but nothing that clearly indicates combat-related injuries. Back problems, joint issues, these could come from any number of causes. What about the shrapnel they removed from his shoulder in 2008? The 3 officials exchanged glances. There's no record of shrapnel removal in his medical file, Janet said. Sarah pulled out another folder. I have the receipt from the private doctor who did the surgery. Miguel paid out of pocket because he said the VA doctors weren't cleared to know about his injuries. Brady examined the medical receipt with obvious skepticism. This just shows a surgical procedure. It doesn't specify what was removed or why. Because Dr. Chen was asked to keep it confidential. Mrs. Martinez, Janet said, her voice taking on a tone one might use with a troubled child. I understand you're grieving, and I understand you want your husband's memory to be honored. But you're asking us to ignore official government records and take your word for an elaborate story about secret missions and classified injuries. We simply cannot do that. Sarah looked around the table at their faces. Janet looked annoyed. Brady looked bored. Dr. Kim looked sympathetic but unconvinced. None of them believed her. Worse, they thought she was lying or deluded. I'm not crazy, she said quietly. And I'm not lying. No one is saying you're crazy, Dr. Kim said gently. But grief can make people see things differently. Sometimes what we want to be true feels true, even when it isn't. That was the breaking point. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. My husband didn't die for nothing. He didn't suffer for nothing. And I won't let you people erase what he did just because it's easier for your paperwork. Mrs. Martinez, please sit down, Brady said. Getting emotional isn't going to change the facts. The facts are that you don't have all the information, Sarah shot back. The facts are that there are operations and missions that aren't in your precious databases. The facts are that my husband and men like him put their lives on the line for this country, and now you're calling him a liar. We're not calling anyone a liar, Janet said firmly. We're telling you what the official records show. And the official records are what we have to go by. Sarah gathered up her photos and documents, shoving them back into her folders. Her hands were shaking with anger and frustration. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Brady said. We've been more than patient, but we cannot continue to waste resources on a case that has no merit. Your final appeal has been denied. If you continue to file frivolous claims, we may have to take legal action for harassment. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah looked at each of them one more time, memorizing their faces, their casual dismissal of her husband's service and sacrifice. She thought about Miguel in his final days, how he had made her promise to fight for the truth, how he had trusted her to make sure his brothers in arms would be remembered and honored. "You don't know who my husband was," she said quietly. "You don't know what he did, what he sacrificed, what he accomplished. But I do. And someday, when the truth comes out, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember the day you called a Navy SEAL a liar." With that, she turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard Janet mutter something to Brady about delusional military widows and wasting taxpayer money. The words hit her like physical blows, but she kept walking. In the hallway, Sarah leaned against the wall and finally let the tears come. 3 years of fighting, 3 years of being dismissed and disbelieved, 3 years of having her husband's honor questioned and her own sanity doubted. She was exhausted, financially drained from legal fees and travel expenses, and no closer to getting Miguel the recognition he deserved. But as she stood there in that cold government hallway, Sarah made a decision. She would take this fight public. She would contact reporters, post on social media, reach out to veteran advocacy groups. If the VA wouldn't listen to her, maybe the public would. She pulled out her phone and began composing a Facebook post. "My husband, Miguel Martinez, served our country as a Navy SEAL. He died from injuries sustained in the line of duty. The VA says he never existed. They're wrong, and I'm going to prove it." As she hit post, Sarah had no idea that her message would be seen by the right person at exactly the right time. She had no idea that her public plea would set in motion a chain of events that would turn her quiet desperation into a very public vindication. All she knew was that she had made a promise to a dying man, and she intended to keep it, no matter how long it took or what it cost her. The truth had a way of coming out, even when powerful people tried to bury it. And sometimes the truth had friends in very unexpected places. They accused her of lying, until a SEAL team walked in and turned the entire room upside down. 3 days after Sarah Martinez posted her desperate plea on Facebook, she was surprised to see her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. What had started as a simple post to her 200 friends had somehow been shared hundreds of times across various veteran groups and military family pages. Comments poured in from people expressing support, sharing similar stories of bureaucratic nightmares, and offering advice. But it was a private message from someone named Jake Torres that caught her attention. The profile showed a man in his 40s with graying hair and serious eyes. His message was simple. "I knew your husband. We need to talk." Sarah's hands trembled as she typed back. "Who are you? How did you know Miguel?" The response came quickly. "Team 7, 2005-2007, Iraq, Afghanistan. Can you meet for coffee tomorrow? I have some people who want to help." The next morning, Sarah found herself sitting in a small diner outside San Diego, nervously stirring her coffee as she watched the door. She had driven 3 hours to get there, not knowing what to expect, but desperate for any connection to Miguel's real military service. When Jake Torres walked in, she recognized him immediately from one of the photos Miguel had kept hidden in his toolbox. He was older now, with more lines around his eyes and gray threading through his dark hair. But it was definitely him. He slid into the booth across from her, his movements precise and economical in the way that marked career military. "Mrs. Martinez," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss. Miguel was a good man and a hell of an operator." For the first time in 3 years, someone was acknowledging what she knew to be true. Tears sprang to her eyes. "The VA says he never served in special operations. They say I'm making it all up." Jake's jaw tightened. That's because his real service record is buried so deep in classified files that even most military personnel don't have access to it. Miguel volunteered for operations that technically never happened in places we were never supposed to be. Can you prove that? Not easily, but I can try. Jake leaned forward. Here's the thing, Sarah. When Miguel died, some of us got together and talked about this exact situation. We knew his family might have trouble getting the benefits he earned. We've been keeping an eye on things, waiting to see if you'd need help. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Because going public with this information could cause problems for people who are still active duty. Some of the operations Miguel was involved in are still classified. But when I saw your post going viral, and when I heard about how the VA treated you yesterday, we decided it was time to act. Sarah felt a mixture of hope and confusion. We? Some of Miguel's old teammates. A few other people who know the truth about what really happened on those missions. We've been talking, and we think it's time the VA got a reality check. Jake pulled out his phone and showed her a group text message thread. Sarah could see partial names and numbers, but more importantly, she could see messages like, "Time to back up Sarah," and "Miguel deserves better than this," and "Let's pay those bureaucrats a visit." "What are you planning?" she asked. Nothing dramatic, just a peaceful visit to help clarify some information. Sometimes, when government officials see the actual people involved in the missions they claim never happened, it helps them understand the situation better. But won't you get in trouble if this is all classified? Jake smiled grimly. "Mrs. Martinez, Miguel's been dead for 3 years. The operations we're talking about are over a decade old. Most of the strategic value of keeping them secret has expired. And frankly, we're all retired now. What are they going to do? Court-martial us for supporting a fallen brother's widow?" Over the next hour, Jake shared stories about Miguel that only someone who had served with him could know. He described missions that matched perfectly with the fragmentary details Miguel had shared with Sarah over the years. He knew about Miguel's habit of carrying a small photo of Sarah in his helmet. He knew about the time Miguel had carried a wounded teammate for 2 miles through hostile territory. He knew about the shrapnel injury that the VA claimed never happened. The explosion that sent metal into Miguel's shoulder also killed 2 other guys, Jake said quietly. It was during a raid on a suspected weapons cache in Fallujah. Officially, that raid never happened because we weren't supposed to be operating in that sector. Unofficially, we prevented about 50 IEDs from ending up on roadways where American convoys traveled daily. Sarah felt vindicated but also angry. So Miguel and other soldiers died or were injured in missions that the government now pretends never happened? "Welcome to the world of black operations," Jake said. "Sometimes the government needs things done that it can't officially acknowledge. The people who do those things understand the risks, including the risk that their service might not be officially recognized later. But that's not fair to the families. No, it's not, which is why we're going to do something about it." Jake explained that he had been in contact with 6 other members of Miguel's old unit, plus 2 officers who had commanded various operations Miguel had participated in. All of them were willing to come forward with testimony about Miguel's actual service record. "But here's the thing," Jake said. "We can't just call the VA and expect them to listen. They've already made up their minds about Miguel, and they've already dismissed you as a delusional widow. We need to make a bigger statement." "What kind of statement?" "The kind where a bunch of Navy SEALs walk into their office and politely explain how things really work." Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with nervousness. "Is that legal? Requesting a meeting with government officials? Absolutely. Providing testimony about military service? Completely legal. Making sure those officials understand that they're dealing with real people who know the real facts? That's just good citizenship?" Jake outlined the plan. He and his former teammates would request a formal meeting with the same VA officials who had dismissed Sarah's claim. They would bring documentation, photographs, and sworn statements about Miguel's actual service. They would present this information in a calm, professional manner. And if they still refuse to believe it? Then we start making some phone calls. We contact our representatives in Congress. We reach out to veteran advocacy groups with some actual political power. We make sure this story gets the attention it deserves. Jake paused. Sarah, the thing about Special Operations veterans is that we tend to know people in interesting places. Military contractors, government officials, journalists, politicians. When we want something to get attention, it gets attention. The conversation continued for another hour as Jake introduced Sarah to some of his contacts via phone. She spoke with Tommy Chen, who had served with Miguel in Afghanistan, and Lisa Rodriguez, who had been their intelligence officer during the Iraq deployment. Each of them shared specific memories and details that corroborated everything Sarah believed about her husband's service. By the time she drove home that evening, Sarah felt more hopeful than she had in years. For the first time since Miguel's death, she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Over the next few days, Jake and his team worked with military precision to organize their approach. They researched the VA officials involved in Sarah's case, prepared documentation, and coordinated schedules. Meanwhile, Sarah's Facebook post continued to spread across social media, picking up support from veteran groups, military families, and advocacy organizations. The story began attracting attention from local news outlets. A reporter from the San Diego Union Tribune contacted Sarah for an interview about her struggle with the VA. When the article was published 3 days later under the headline, "Widow Fights VA Over Husband's Hidden Military Service," it included quotes from Jake Torres confirming Miguel's special operations background. The article caught the attention of a blogger who specialized in military affairs, who wrote a follow-up piece that was picked up by several larger publications. Soon, Sarah found herself fielding interview requests from radio shows and online podcasts. Throughout it all, Jake and his team continued preparing for their meeting with the VA. They assembled a detailed timeline of Miguel's actual service, including mission dates, locations, and operational details. They gathered sworn affidavits from 8 different service members who could testify to Miguel's SEAL training and deployment history. They even managed to obtain declassified portions of after-action reports that mentioned Miguel's contributions to successful missions. The beautiful thing about bureaucrats, Jake explained to Sarah during one of their planning calls, is that they're terrified of being embarrassed in public. Right now, your story is starting to get attention and they're beginning to look like either incompetent or callous. When we show up with irrefutable proof that they're wrong, they're going to be very motivated to fix this quietly and quickly. A week after their first meeting, Jake called Sarah with news. "We have an appointment with your VA friends tomorrow at 2 p.m. Regional Director Brady agreed to meet with us after we sent him some preliminary documentation that got his attention." "What kind of documentation?" "Let's just say that when a retired Navy SEAL commander sends you a letter explaining that you've been denying benefits to one of his former operators, and that letter is copied to 3 members of Congress and a Pentagon Oversight Committee, you tend to take the meeting." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Will I be there?" "You'll be the guest of honor. This is your fight, Sarah. We're just providing some backup." That night, Sarah could barely sleep. Tomorrow, she would walk back into the same building where she had been dismissed and humiliated, but this time she wouldn't be alone. This time she would have witnesses who could verify everything she had been trying to tell them for 3 years. As she lay in bed, she thought about Miguel and the promise she had made to him. Tomorrow she would either finally get the recognition he deserved, or she would learn that even the testimony of his former teammates wasn't enough to overcome bureaucratic stubbornness. Either way, she was no longer the isolated, doubted widow she had been a week ago. Now she had allies, people who knew the truth and were willing to fight for it. The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully in her best suit. She gathered all her documentation, including the new materials Jake's team had provided. As she drove to the VA building, She tried to imagine the expression on Janet Williams's face when a room full of Navy SEALs calmly explained that she had been wrong about everything. The thought made her smile for the first time in months. By the time she pulled into the parking lot, 2 other cars were already there. She could see Jake and several other men in suits standing near the building entrance. They looked like what they were: serious, professional military veterans who were accustomed to accomplishing their missions. As Sarah approached them, Jake turned and nodded. "Ready to get your husband the recognition he earned?" Sarah took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "Let's do this." They walked into the building together. A small group of people united by their respect for a fallen SEAL and their determination to ensure that his service would not be forgotten or denied. The bureaucrats inside had no idea what was about to hit them. They accused her of lying until a SEAL team walked in and turned the entire room upside down. At exactly 2 p.m., Sarah Martinez walked through the doors of the VA building with 7 men in dark suits flanking her. To anyone watching, they looked like a corporate delegation or government officials. In reality, they were retired Navy SEALs, special operations officers, and military intelligence personnel who had served alongside Miguel Martinez in some of the most dangerous missions of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. Jake Torres led the group, his bearing unmistakably military despite the civilian clothes. Behind him walked Commander, retired, David Foster, who had led Miguel's unit during 3 separate deployments. Next came Master Chief Petty Officer, retired, Marcus Webb, a legend in SEAL circles who had personally recommended Miguel for advanced training. The others included Tommy Chen, Lisa Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant, retired, Kevin Murphy from Army Special Forces, who had worked joint operations with Miguel's team, and Captain, retired, James Sullivan, who had access to classified personnel files that the VA apparently didn't know existed. Janet Williams was waiting in the lobby, clearly expecting just Sarah and perhaps a lawyer. When she saw the group approaching, her expression shifted from annoyed resignation to visible confusion. "Mrs. Martinez," Janet said carefully, "I thought this was going to be just you and perhaps one representative." "These gentlemen served with my husband," Sarah said simply. "I thought you might want to hear from people who actually knew him." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ma'am, I'm Jake Torres, retired Navy SEAL. I served with Miguel Martinez for 3 years. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Janet shook his hand automatically, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm not sure what additional information you think you can provide, Mr. Torres. We've thoroughly reviewed the official service records." "That's exactly what we'd like to discuss," Commander Foster said, stepping forward. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I understand there's some confusion about Petty Officer Martinez's service record." "Petty Officer?" Janet looked flustered. "According to our records, Mr. Martinez was an undesignated seaman." "Ma'am," Master Chief Webb interjected politely, "with all due respect, your records are incomplete." By now, Thomas Brady and Dr. Rachel Kim had appeared in the lobby, clearly having been alerted to the unusual nature of their visitors. Brady's face was already flushed, and Dr. Kim looked curious but cautious. "Perhaps we should move this to a conference room," Brady suggested, glancing around at the other people in the lobby who were beginning to take notice of the group. They were led to the same room where Sarah had been humiliated a week earlier. As everyone took seats around the table, the dynamic was completely different. Instead of 3 officials facing one desperate widow, it was now 9 people crowded around a table designed for 6, with the VA officials clearly outnumbered and uncertain. "Gentlemen," Brady began, trying to regain control of the situation, "while we appreciate your desire to support Mrs. Martinez, we cannot change official military records based on testimonial evidence. The Department of Defense maintains comprehensive personnel files, and Mr. Martinez's file clearly shows—" "May I?" Commander Foster interrupted gently, pulling out a folder. "I have Mr. Martinez's actual service record here." "That's impossible," Janet said. "We've requested his complete file multiple times." "You've requested his unclassified service record," Foster corrected. "What you have there is essentially a cover story designed to protect ongoing operational security." He opened his folder and pulled out several documents. "Miguel Martinez, Petty Officer 2nd Class, Navy SEAL qualification completed 2003, Special Operations Deployment Authorization 2003 through 2008, Purple Heart recipient, Bronze Star with Combat V device recipient, Navy Commendation Medal recipient." He slid photocopies of the documents across the table. Janet picked them up with shaking hands, scanning them quickly. These look official," she said uncertainly. "They are official," Jake said. "The question is why they weren't in the files you accessed." Dr. Kim leaned forward. "Are you saying there are military personnel whose service records are deliberately falsified?" "Not falsified," Captain Sullivan explained. "Compartmentalized. When someone participates in highly classified operations, their official service record often reflects only their basic training and assignments. The classified portions are maintained separately, with access limited to people with appropriate clearance levels." "But why?" Brady asked. "What's the point of hiding someone's service record?" Master Chief Webb answered. "Because sometimes knowing exactly when and where someone served can compromise ongoing operations or put other service members at risk. Miguel's unit operated in areas where we weren't officially supposed to be, conducting missions that certain foreign governments might find diplomatically problematic if they became public knowledge." Sarah watched the VA officials' faces as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Janet was studying the documents with growing alarm. Brady looked like he was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to his office. Dr. Kim appeared genuinely fascinated by the revelation that she had been working with incomplete information. "So," Janet said slowly, "when Mrs. Martinez said her husband served in Afghanistan and Iraq with Special Operations Forces, she was telling the truth?" "Completely," Tommy Chen said. "I was there. We served together for 18 months. Miguel saved my life during a mission in Kandahar province in 2006. "And when she said he was injured by shrapnel during a mission?" Dr. Kim asked. "March 15th, 2007, outside Fallujah," Kevin Murphy said. "Improvised explosive device hit our convoy. Miguel took metal fragments in his shoulder and back but refused medical evacuation until all wounded personnel were secured. I wrote him up for a commendation for that action." "The medical records she provided from the private doctor?" Brady asked weakly. "Dr. Chen in San Diego has security clearance to treat special operations personnel," Captain Sullivan explained. "Miguel went to him because VA doctors at the time weren't cleared to know about his classified injuries. Standard procedure." For several minutes, the room was silent, except for the sound of Janet flipping through documents. Finally, she looked up at Sarah with an expression of dawning horror. "Mrs. Martinez," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "The question is," Commander Foster said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "what are you going to do to fix this? Mrs. Martinez has been fighting for 3 years to get her husband the recognition he earned. She's been told she was lying, delusional, and fraudulent. She's been threatened with legal action for filing frivolous claims. This is unacceptable." Brady shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Obviously, we'll need to review the case in light of this new information." "There's no review needed," Jake said firmly. "The information is clear. Miguel Martinez served with distinction in special operations for over 5 years. He was wounded in combat multiple times. He died from complications related to those service-connected injuries. His widow deserves full disability benefits, survivor benefits, and a formal apology from this office." "Well, it's not quite that simple," Brady began. "Actually, it is," Captain Sullivan interrupted, pulling out another document. I've already prepared the paperwork for Mrs. Martinez's benefits claim based on Miguel's actual service record. All that's needed is your signature approving the claim. He slid the papers across to Brady, who stared at them like they might explode. Who gave you the authority to? Brady stammered. Mr. Brady, Commander Foster said quietly, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. We're not asking you to approve something questionable. We're asking you to correct a mistake. Miguel Martinez earned these benefits with his blood and service. His widow has been denied those benefits due to administrative incompetence. That ends today. The room fell silent again. Sarah could see Brady calculating, trying to figure out his options. Finally, Dr. Kim spoke up. Mrs. Martinez, I owe you a personal apology as well. I suggested that your husband might have been experiencing false memories related to PTSD. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Sarah nodded, accepting the apology but still feeling the sting of 3 years of disbelief and dismissal. What I don't understand, Janet said, is why this information wasn't available to us before. If Mr. Martinez's real service record exists, why couldn't we access it? Because, Master Chief Webb said, you didn't know what questions to ask or who to ask them. Miguel's service was compartmentalized for security reasons. The people who had access to his real record weren't in your normal chain of communication. So how many other families might be in the same situation? Brady asked. More than you'd probably like to know, Jake said grimly. The good news is that now you know the problem exists. You can start developing procedures to handle these cases properly. Captain Sullivan pulled out a business card and handed it to Brady. This is the contact information for the Pentagon office that maintains classified service records. They've been instructed to cooperate with legitimate benefits inquiries, provided you follow the proper protocols. Which are? Janet asked. Call that number. Explain that you're dealing with a benefits claim for someone whose service may have been classified, and ask for a records review. They'll walk you through the process. Commander Foster leaned back in his chair. Now, about Mrs. Martinez's benefits. Brady looked at the paperwork in front of him, then at the faces of the 7 military veterans surrounding him, then at Sarah. The math wasn't complicated. He could continue to resist and face the inevitable publicity nightmare when this story went public, or he could do the right thing and approve the benefits claim. Mrs. Martinez, he said finally, I'm approving your husband's benefits claim effective immediately. You'll receive full survivor benefits backdated to the date of his death, plus compensation for the delays caused by our office's incomplete understanding of the situation. Sarah felt tears of relief and vindication flooding her eyes. After 3 years of fighting, of being doubted and dismissed, of watching her husband's honor questioned, it was finally over. Thank you, she whispered. There's one more thing, Commander Foster said. Miguel Martinez deserves to have his actual service record reflected in official VA files. We're prepared to provide full documentation of his missions, commendations, and injuries so that his sacrifice is properly acknowledged. Of course, Brady said quickly. We'll update our files immediately. As the meeting concluded and paperwork was signed, Sarah found herself surrounded by men who had fought alongside her husband, who had respected him, who had never forgotten him. For the first time since Miguel's death, she felt like his service was truly honored. Outside the building, Jake turned to her with a smile. How does it feel? Like Miguel can finally rest in peace, Sarah said. Thank you, all of you. I don't know how to repay this. You don't repay it, Master Chief Webb said. You just make sure Miguel's story gets told so this doesn't happen to the next family. As they walked to their cars, Commander Foster handed Sarah another business card. This is for a journalist who specializes in military affairs. She's interested in writing about the issues with classified service records and veteran benefits. Your story could help a lot of other families. Sarah looked back at the VA building, thinking about Janet Williams and Thomas Brady and Dr. Kim, probably still sitting in that conference room trying to figure out what had just happened to them. For 3 years, they had treated her like she was nobody, like her husband was nobody, like the truth didn't matter as long as their paperwork was neat and tidy. Today they had learned that sometimes the truth has powerful friends, and that the people who serve in the shadows are never really forgotten by the brothers and sisters who served alongside them. Sarah Martinez drove home that afternoon with her husband's honor finally restored, his service finally acknowledged, and his sacrifice finally recognized. Miguel had always said that no one fights alone in the teams. It had taken 3 years, but Sarah had finally learned what that really meant.